Welcome to Core Youth Voices. So I just want to start off by asking you, who is Kiran?
Gideon is a, it's so funny to talk in the third person. Gideon is a young woman who's, I guess, 22 years old, and I just graduated college in Washington, D.C. I just finished up an undergraduate degree in international relations, and I'm going back to D.C. to begin working soon. But I guess the person Gideon as opposed to the student Gideon is more of an artist, and so that's my sort of side personality as opposed to the student Gideon. My Dadiji is an artist, and she taught me from when I was very young how to draw and to paint, and I thought for a good amount of time about going to art school eventually, but I found another passion in politics and policy and social justice, and art felt more like a reflective practice for me and something that was more personal, and so I kept it sort of that way, where it's carried on in parallel through all of my studies. Was raised in a household that very much valued family and valued sangat and valued education. And so I was brought up by my Dadaji has a PhD, he was a professor. And so he instilled the connection between Sikhi and education for me, and the value of doing really good hard work and of furthering ourselves and contributing something to society was instilled in Sikhi and instilled in this sort of American dream sort of value of education. And then on the art side, I was taught that being creative and being expressive and having an appreciation for the physical world and having an appreciation for the things that we can draw and represent in other ways and bring joy to that.
I assume that your grandparents grew up in India and they came as adults to this country. So how was the interaction?
My dad and dadi and my nana nani all were immigrants to this country, and all came from a pre-partition India, went through a massive migration in 47, and then again coming to the United States in the 60s. Both sides of my family came in the 60s. And on my mom's side, her eldest Mamaji was also a professor who came to do his studies here. Same with my Dadaji, and they were ultimately the sponsors for the rest of their family. And something like education and something like Sikhi were two constants in the midst of a lot of change in their lives. And so my dad and his siblings and my mom and her brother, they all value education and they all value Sikhi in those ways. And I think they were always explained in parallel to us, where being a good Sikh meant also being a good student, and being a good student meant like doing something good in the world. And it wasn't just about like getting good grades, but it was about like representing something bigger than yourself as you contribute back.
Do you feel that cultural competency or even cultural literacy is important in today's times?
Of course. I think that cultural awareness and cultural competency is the way in which a multifaceted society will be able to move forward. The idea of cultural competency and cultural awareness is, I think, based in the idea of mutual respect. I think growing up in a place where I recognized that I was a minority or recognized that I was different from my peers around me made me very aware of things like race and gender at a very young age, and the combination of the two and the intersectionality of the two, of being a brown woman in a different space. And so I think every interaction that I've had, in some ways, I'm hyper aware of the dynamic of being different. And I don't think it's something that I consider to be a weight or a burden or something that sets me back in every interaction, but it is something that makes it different. And I think I went to a PWI for undergrad. And so I went to a school that was predominantly wealthy white students. It was a private university. And so I think the way in which the administration addressed its students was keeping the majority in mind a lot of the time. And so again, it was not necessarily to the absolute detriment of the minority communities on campus, but we are always aware then that we are the minority because we know who's being spoken to. And so, I mean, that's not a very specific example, but I think navigating higher education in the United States means that you're aware when you are not the default. I would love a world in which somebody might know that because I wear a cut or because I have long hair, that means I stand for something, and that means I stand for this specific thing. I think in an ideal world, if people were to know what being a Kaur means, I think there's a few things that would be understood. I think the concept of Kaur as it exists parallel to Singh, the idea of this Kaur and Singh framework that we were given, allows for individual sovereignty in a really unique way. I take so much pride in the fact that my name is Kiran Kaur, and that Kaur comes from Gunvor, and Gunvor is prince, and that like it's this idea that it is not dependent on the other, and it is not dependent on somebody else's title. And the idea that names and that surnames denote caste in Indian culture and in the subcontinent, that those names then carried social weight. And to remove that and to do away with all of that, to say, no, this has nothing to do with caste, this has nothing to do with hierarchy.
Right.
Here we're just going to acknowledge people by their differences and by the respect that they deserve. And so I think that's, again, it's speaking to, that's a similar note in terms of cultural competency. The difference is not the problem. We didn't get to call everybody Singh, we didn't call everybody Kaur. There was a difference that was worth acknowledging because there was some marginalization and there was a difference of experience that was worth acknowledging. And so the Singh Kaur framework that was given to us, I think, was fundamental in solidifying what the previous 9 gurus had also said, which was each individual has absolute worth and has divine worth, and that we're going to immortalize that in the way that we speak to each other and the way that we address each other. And so I think to say that somebody's a Singh and to say that somebody's a Kaur is to give them the respect of being an individual. If I were to pick a few things that I would want mainstream American media or mainstream society to be aware of in terms of Sikhi as a distinct faith, one would be probably the Singh Kaur framework that we talked about in terms of giving sovereignty and agency to each individual person within a community and not establishing hierarchy or middlemen in terms of access to spirituality. Each Singh and Kaur, an individual within our community, has equal access to understanding and has equal access to engagement and to every role that exists within that community. And I think that's incredibly powerful and distinct. And I think the last one is that in an American context, Sikhi is a school of thought that is based in a notion of justice and in a notion of civil justice, and the idea that because people have worth as individuals and because there isn't hierarchy amongst us, we should have equal access and equal opportunities. And that is to say that the American notions of justice and of rule of law and of equity are not at odds with anything that's in Sikhi.
Do you also wear your Sikhi with a badge of pride?
Yes, of course. And I think that that's something that was a process also in and of itself to wear Sikhi as a badge of pride, because I remember distinctly in middle school being bullied for being different. And I remember distinctly trying to blend in. I was very shy in middle school and I was very much in myself because I didn't want to bring more attention to myself than there was. I went to camps in Maryland and in California, and I went to Civic when I was in high school. And those were foundational experiences in terms of being proud of what I get to carry. Specifically, finding pride in my name changed a lot over the course of high school. And the idea of being Kiran Kaur was something that I learned about only through the academic experiences of camp, and then was able to understand that over the course of the rest of the year about what that meant to me. I distinctly remember being 12 or 13 years old when Trayvon Martin was shot. And I remember that bursting this sort of bubble in my head about the reality of racial injustice in this country, because I remember being unaware at that time and not understanding the difference in the human experience based off of race living in this country, and not understanding that that there was so much that was still broken and so much that was built on purpose to break other people. And I remember being 12 and 13 and 14 and going into high school with this like newfound rage that the world was the way that it was, and wanting to be part of the movement to change it. And I've changed my mind over the course of the years about how I want to go about it and what I want to do, but it was always in pursuit of seeing if there was more that I could do. And so I went to DC for that reason of being in the hub of politics and policy in this country and wanting to see what it was all about and what there was that I could do. And I loved being in DC. I'm going back to DC actually now in the midst of COVID. I'm going back to DC to work on the Hill in Capitol Hill in my senator's office. And so we'll see where that takes me. I interned in Senator Feinstein's office 2 years ago. And while I was there, it was very apparent to me that that the diversity of the state wasn't being represented there in that office. And it's a hard thing to do. It's a slow process to shift, but I think that was a lot of my impetus for going back to Capitol Hill and going back to this office specifically, was because I think there was an initiative there to make that change in terms of bringing in people from the different corners of the state and bringing in people who have experiences and communities that are distinct. That was something that was desired, and so it made me want to go back, that openness. And the people on Capitol Hill, not just the senator in California, are in this process of realizing the intersections between communities and of policies that can create a lot of really positive change. Acknowledging those intersections and bringing in people from those communities is part of that change. And so that's sort of my hope in going back to Capitol Hill, is to be a little bit of a representative for something and a community that's bigger than myself, because to say that I can represent the Sikh community of California is a vast overstatement. That's not my intention, but to be sort of a voice in the room that has something to say about this particular community that might be overlooked and that has been overlooked in terms of policy for a long time is part of the hope. And so I think I'm super excited for that opportunity to be something of a representative.